So today I wanted to explore what it's really like to live in Bali. Not that Instagram fluff or the TikTok things that you see all the time that are a little bit fake, but what it's really like here in Bali day to day. I don't want to go through like my daily activities. I think that could be a little bit boring, but I want to go through what it's like, what the benefits are, what some of the negatives are. And I just remembered that some of you may not have actually seen my sign, my Sanur diary sign. I had that quite a while. I don't really film inside the house too much anymore, but I wanted to start off this video talking about the house that I live in and how this is a bit of a metaphor for what it's really like to live here in Bali. My house is not a villa. You know, it's not one of these things that you see on Instagram or the internet, these pure white walls with a huge sprawling garden, crystal blue pool, and this lifestyle where you're eating, you know, a smoothie bowl in the morning and clean eating and all that sort of stuff. This is totally different to that. All that facade has been washed away when you see my house. Now, it's a good house. It's a really good house, but it's not the typical Instagram style. So I'll show you through the house first to give you an idea of what I mean. So there we are. Well, I'm in the second bedroom at the moment with that sign there, a couple of lights that I might use sometimes. That's the bathroom that I use, which is sort of the ensuite bathroom for this single bedroom here. And then the master bedroom, or the main bedroom, is here. Huge, tall ceilings, nice big bed, and a huge amount of room in this bedroom. Another big bathroom over there, and then a view out into the road area. Huge big wardrobes, a lot of storage space there. We've got a lot of junk in this house that we've accumulated over the past couple of years, which is pretty normal. But the good thing about that is reality, you know. It's not this Instagram thing that it really drives me crazy to see people always talking about their perfect life in Bali. And it's not that. So this is a two-story house. The layout's a little bit odd, but comes with a wife as well. That's Susan. That's really what it looks like on the bottom floor. That's almost entirely the bottom floor there. So you can see over there a little plunge pool, which is sort of almost like inside the house. Main living area, and then the kitchen area is over there. So as you can see, it's more like a normal residential house rather than one of these fancy white-walled villas, which are more appropriate if you're coming here shorter term, when you don't have a lot of stuff. You don't need a lot of storage space. You might only have, you know, a little bit of clothing, or, you know, a little bit of, you know, the stuff that you acquire, crockery and stuff like that. You might only have one plate. Here, you've got a lot more if you've got people over and that sort of thing. So what you're really seeing when you see these I live in Bali videos most of the time is someone that's on holiday. They're not really living there. They're there for a longer term stay, maybe a few months. They might have even been there 6 months, but they're not going to be there long term. And because of that, you have a different outlook, and you're willing to pay a different price for the type of place that you're staying in as well. For example, for 2 years in this place, I pay 25 million. But if you want to stay like in Canggu, for example, in one of those fancy villas, you'll pay a lot more than that. And that's mainly because you're doing shorter term rentals. You're willing to pay a little bit more because you're not going to be there forever. You're not invested in the place. I also pay for internet here. I never used to in the past, but in recent times I've put my own internet on because I need a faster internet. So I get 300 megabit internet for 5 million per year, which I think is a pretty good price. So once you've been here a little while and the honeymoon period is over, life is completely different. And I wanted to explain some of that as we go through some of the points that I think are really important about what it's like to live in Bali. If you're new to the channel, my name's Adam, and I've been married to an Indonesian for about 14 years and lived in Indonesia for approximately the same amount of time. And I absolutely love Indonesia. Hello. I'm obsessed with Indonesia. And that's why I made the channel, actually, to showcase Indonesia to the world, and also to allow me to explore Indonesia a little bit more deeply as well, because when you've got a channel like this, you're always searching for new things to have a look at. Now, one of the things that I wanted to talk about today was what it's really like to live in Bali without all of that fluff that you get on Instagram and TikTok. You know, it's a little bit fake, you know. It's always trying to make things look better than it really is, or sometimes making things look worse than it really is. The first thing I want to talk about is quality of life. The thing about quality of life is that for different people, it means different things. There are different things that different people need for their life to be fulfilling and nice and enjoyable. For example, some people love surfing, and being in a place like Bali or Greater Indonesia is absolutely a godsend for them, and that really improves their quality of life. But for me, the surfing's sort of irrelevant. So keep that in mind as I talk about some of the things that are important to me when it comes to quality of life, because it's different for every person. The number one thing for me when it comes to Bali quality of life is the happiness of the people and the happiness of your life because of that. And it's hard to quantify. It's not one of these things you can really measure, but you instantly feel it when you're here. And if you come here on a holiday, you definitely feel it. The people are so pleasant to deal with on a daily basis that it just uplifts your spirits all the time. You're constantly in a fairly good mood. Now, it's interesting because some people that come here don't have that same experience. The happiness thing isn't really important to them. But for me, being around really positive people just makes so much of a difference. I often find if I'm back in Australia or even other places around the world, if people are a little bit miserable or not really engaging or not really laughing too much, that it sort of brings me down too. And it just feels nice to have a bit of a laugh and a bit of a, bit of a joke with people all the time. The thing about that though is that you actually do need to interact with local people. It's not like you've got to have like 1,000 best friends who are all Balinese. It's not like that. But you need to have some sort of banter with Balinese people from time to time, and whether that be you go to your local warung and you're talking to the guy that's serving you coffee every morning and having a bit of a laugh about what's going on, or whether you've got a next door neighbour that you go and have a bit of a chin wag with it every now and then. I think it's important to make that effort to have some sort of connection with people. Otherwise, that happiness that I'm talking about doesn't flow through to you. And you can become quite isolated. I've noticed that with some people is that they are quite isolated here in Bali because they don't seem to have much interaction either with locals or the other people who are going to lift their spirits. They might be hanging around a bunch of people who are pretty miserable. The other thing about that quality of life thing is that when I think about politics, well, I don't think about politics very much. I know that back in the olden days, we didn't talk about politics that much. You might have a political story on the news once a week or something like that, but now we're fed 24/7 politics through social media and so forth, and we tend to engage, and I think it's completely destructive to your own mental well-being. Now, when you live here in Bali, you have no representation. You are represented by whoever the Balinese people or the Indonesian people elect. And because of that, you don't really feel like you've got any input, and I find that quite empowering. Not having a voice is actually quite nice. Now, that might sound like a bit of an odd thing to say, that not having a voice is quite empowering, but the thing about it is that when you don't have to think about these things and you just let them happen to you. G'day, how you going? When I'm out and about, I often bump into people who actually watch the channel, and these guys here from Melbourne. Say hello. Now, that might sound like an odd thing to say. Not having a voice is quite empowering. How can that be? We're supposed to be in a democracy where having your voice is everything. And I understand the reasons why democracy is great and all of that sort of stuff. But I've got to tell you, when you don't have to participate in it so directly and for every second of every day, Jesus, it's like having a weight taken off your shoulders. It's so draining to have to be engaged with every minute detail about a politician's life, about whether they're making this decision correctly or that decision correctly, whether they're doing this wrong or that wrong. And then people get into camps on either side and they hate each other and fight. I mean, I hate it. I absolutely hate it. But it's sometimes difficult to avoid when you're in a place like Australia, or probably worse in America at the moment. It's tiring. Here, I don't have to think about it at all. And it's actually one of the reasons why I don't mention politics on the channel. It's not because I don't have a view on things. It's not because I have certain leanings or certain ways that I think, or on certain opinions on certain politicians. I think we all do. But if I start talking about that on the channel, even if I just drop a hint, it sparks off a whole debate, and I just don't want to have a bar of it. So that's the great thing about living here as far as politics goes. Just let it happen. And if a politician in Indonesia makes a particular decision that you don't like, well, it's bad luck because you don't have a say, and that's okay. You learn to deal with it. You don't have to try and worry about, how am I going to counteract this or whatever. That's just life. Having said that, you do have to be careful that you don't try and engage in local politics if you're not a citizen, because you don't have any right. But a lot of people from overseas that move into Indonesia, I've noticed, try to sort of get involved in what the government's doing and this and that and the other. There's no point because you don't have any say. The next thing for me that's really important when it comes to quality of life is weather. Now, I don't want to live in a place where it's like drizzling all the time. You know, you just don't want to live in one of those places where it's just miserable weather. Here, you have these really extremes of weather. So first of all, it's warm. So it's always warm. That's actually uplifting in itself. It's usually sunny, even in the wet season like it is now. It's sunny and pleasant. That just lifts your spirits. But the other thing is, with these extremes of weather, it's actually, I don't know how to describe it, and it's one of these intangible things that I sort of mentioned. It's that when you have these extremes of weather, like a big thunderstorm or whatever, it's a little bit exciting. It's a little bit interesting. It makes you feel a little bit more alive. Now, I don't want a cyclone to rip through, but having the odd thunderstorm and then the odd flood, minor flood, like you don't want your house to be sort of drowned in water, but if you have a minor flood or whatever, it's actually quite okay. And then you get hot weather and you have a high tide that washes over the path. There's something about it which is quite grounding, I think, that you are a little bit closer to the power of nature. Does that make sense? It might not, but when you're here, you do feel that. It's quite nice to have this really wild weather occasionally. Of course, tied in with that is the beach. Now, I'm not a beach person. I don't swim at the beach. I don't really like sand very much. Like, I just don't enjoy the beach. But I enjoy being here in Sanur at the beach, walking along this beachfront path and having that water there and feeling and smelling that ocean every morning is just amazing. So having the beach there is wonderful. I don't need to go in the water to enjoy it. I don't need to have a big swim or a big kayaking session or surfing or anything like that. Some people do, but I don't. So that's another thing about the quality of life. And I couldn't afford to do that if I was living in Australia, for example, because being near the beach is really expensive. And that ties in closely to my next point about quality of life, which is about location. Where I live is so convenient to everything for me. So one of the reasons I chose to live in Sanur is not because of the tourist vibe here. It's because of really practical things that make living here just so much better. So that is closeness to the airport. So if you need to go and nick somewhere for a little while, getting to the airport's easy. It's close to really good eating and really simple eating. It's a lot cheaper because of the style of places that you have around here. It's not that sort of Canggu, Seminyak, ultra modern style cafe thing that goes on here that much. So that's nice. Being close to the beach, of course, that's just brilliant. Like, I live pretty close to this beachfront path. I can just nick across here whenever I want, make a video, go for a run, have a bit of an exercise, go and join up with friends if I need to. Just brilliant location. Everything's really convenient, close to supermarkets. I can walk out the door and go to a warung. That is a massive improvement on my quality of life, especially when you compare it to what I was experiencing when I was in Java. I lived in a very poor location. Well, when I say poor, I don't mean like no money type poor. It just wasn't convenient to anything. And that really degraded my quality of life. One of the things that a lot of people complain about when they move to Bali is the lack of enforcement of rules, so the lack of regulation. A lot of people assume that there are no rules in Bali, and you know, Bali is part of Indonesia. They have a really robust set of rules and laws, and they're all documented. You can look them up on the internet, but enforcement's not really rigid. And a lot of people are sort of frustrated by that, and I get frustrated by it as well sometimes. But there is one massive benefit about those rules not being enforced, and that is it can make your life a lot less stressful. So let's just dig into that a little bit further. What do I mean by that? Well, a good example would be, I know that if I'm in Australia, I'm always, when I'm driving, a little bit tense, a little bit worried that I'm going to make a mistake and maybe get fined by the police, because the police are pretty strict and you've got cameras everywhere watching over your shoulder, and you just feel like you can't have any peace. Now, I'm not advocating for people to go and break the rules, but a little bit more self-regulation makes life a little bit better. In Bali, everything's about self-regulation. I mean, if you go and break the law by speeding down a road and you kill someone, you are in a lot of trouble and you wear the consequences for that. You're not going to have the police pulling you over prior to it happening, but if you do something bad and you kill someone, you're in a world of hurt. You're not just going to be deported, you'll be you'll be bankrupted from all the money you have to compensate people for. You're going to go to jail. I think some people sort of fail to recognise that sometimes, that the lack of implementation or the lack of enforcement of rules means that you have to actually do it yourself. You still have to abide by the rules. You're just not going to have someone watching over your shoulder. How does that impact quality of life? Well, it's really important, because one of the things that I realise is that when you're here, you don't have that feeling of someone watching over your shoulder, and it really lifts a lot of stress off you. You don't often notice it when you're in Australia. Some people do. Like, some people are really anti-rules, and I'm not an anti-rule person, but I actually stick to the rules. But in Australia, I find that you're always operating at just a bit of a higher level, a bit of a higher stress level, and here, not so much. The next big one that we need to talk about is value for money, and I know that this is actually the thing that most people think of before moving to a place like Bali is, oh, it's so cheap, my money will go further. And of course that is a big reason. It's not the number one for me. Those other things that I've mentioned so far are much more important. But the good thing is that it is very, very good value for money living in Bali. You can buy much better things for the same money that you could in a place like Australia or the US or Europe. Now, what does that mean in practical terms? Well, it means that you might get a better house, or you might have a better location, or you might be eating better food. Or if you love your alcohol, you might be drinking a lot more beers here. And that's actually one of the pitfalls about coming to a place like Indonesia, is that you can really go off the deep end when it comes to alcohol if you're not too careful, because it's so cheap. And same as smoking as well. But anyway, that's each to their own, I guess. But one of the things about the value for money thing here is that if you've got enough money already and you come over here on like a retirement visa, and maybe you only live here 6 months a year or what have you, it means that retirement money that you've got saved up is going to last either a lot longer, or you're going to get better things for it. You're going to have a better quality of life for the same amount of money. And it sort of makes sense. A lot of countries are offering these sorts of retirement visas, and it's a little bit competitive, I suppose, in terms of which country you might want to choose to go to. Like Malaysia's got one, and I think Thailand's got one as well, and then Bali's got one. But depending on where you originate from in the world, like if you're from Australia, like it's easier to come to Bali. But if you live in Europe, maybe Thailand's a better option for you. So those sorts of things are part of the consideration. But say you retired and you only get the pension, and it's not that much money. Like living in Australia on the pension and nothing else is not a lot of money. You're really having to save your pennies. But if you can manage to come here for many months in a year and use that same money here, it goes far, far further. And there are people I know who do it. There's one guy in particular, his name's David. Hi David, if you're watching. He's based in Perth, and he comes across here for many, many months at a time every year, not just because it's cheaper, but because he has a better quality of life, and his money goes far when he's here. He also keeps a place back in Perth that he has to rent as well. But a lot of people do find something that works for them. You have to find your own way of making it work. But certainly, if you're trying to save a few pennies and you can get the right visa to be here, it's absolutely fantastic. A few examples of the sort of prices that you would pay for certain things across here. At the very simple level, without sort of researching too much, you can get a room in a guest house for about 300,000 rupiah per night. You can actually do it cheaper, but let's just say 300,000 rupiah per night, or 10 million a month. And that's on a nightly basis, not on a monthly basis. You can get something for 10 million a month. Now, if you've got a little bit more money, you'll spend a little bit more and get something a little bit better. If you've got not as much money, you can go a lot cheaper than that as well, but it starts getting a little bit rough at the lower end. But that's the sort of price range you're looking at the cheap end if you've got no money. Now, if you do have a fairly generous retirement arrangement where you've got a lot of savings and you might have a government pension, and then you can open up the purse strings a little bit, well, your money goes a lot further and you get something quite nice. And you could even do something like I'm doing and rent a place on a yearly basis and just pop over every now and then and just live in it and store a lot of your stuff there. You could do that as well. There's a lot of different options. There are definitely some traps you can fall into if you move here and don't work on things. If you just roll up here and let yourself go, you can actually have a negative quality of life. and it might revolve around things like healthcare, mental health, and that sort of thing. You notice quite a lot of people who move to Asia, there's a sort of a grumpy old man syndrome that happens over here in Asia and Bali in particular. You see it all the time. You actually see it in Thailand a lot as well, is where people get set in their ways, they get older, and they're probably a little bit isolated, probably don't have really too many close connections. And it's sort of making it worse with social media as well. But there's a sort of a guy that sort of goes down to the bar every day, has his close group of friends, and they just sort of whinge about everything. And it's quite a negative existence. And a lot of those people, I think these days, are getting onto social media and expressing those concerns as well. And it's this sort of loop of a feedback loop of negativity. And I actually fear for these people's mental health. And for me, it's a real shame to slip into that real negative mindset. It does happen to people, and you have to work on it. You can't just sort of roll up here and expect everything's going to be rosy. You do have to make some effort to keep things sort of rolling. So how do I handle that? How do I handle some of these negative characters around the place? Well, basically I remove them from my life. I don't interact with them. If anyone pops up on the channel that's like not a nice person, you know, I'll block them and I won't respond to them. I won't engage. I don't hang around people who are not very nice. Like occasionally you'll meet people who, well, it's not that they're not nice, but they're all just whinging all the time. No way. I've got no time for people whinging all the time, you know what I mean? Like I'm not gonna deal with that when I'm here. I'm here for a happy life. And I've got it, you know, I'm not gonna sort of have that ruined by people who are a little bit sort of unhappy with the world, I suppose. With all that said, life here for me is actually quite normal. It doesn't really feel like a holiday. And I know that when you first move here, it can feel like a holiday, and you've got to be careful about that honeymoon period because it's actually a little bit false. When you really settle in and you get into the daily grind of living here in Bali, I say grind, it's not a grind, but the daily sort of routine here of living in Bali, it's totally different. I mean, for example, you have to deal with rubbish issues. Like my rubbish hasn't been picked up in 10 days. How are you going to handle that? Am I just going to build a big bonfire out the front, or am I going to dump it in the gutter? Well, I'm not going to do any of those. I'm going to buy a bigger bin. But those little things, you know, you don't really notice when you're here on a short-term sort of holiday or whatever, and you've got that sort of more optimistic view of the world. And when you start living here more longer term, reality does set in and it's no longer a holiday, and you've got to adapt to what the situation is on the ground. I actually don't mind it. Like rubbish not being picked up in 10 days, it's mildly frustrating, but you know, you've got to deal with it. So you come up with a solution. There's things like that happen all the time here in Bali. It's not perfect, but that's okay. And that's what sort of living in a place, having a place that feels like home is really all about, is dealing with the good and the bad and trying to make the best out of a situation which may not always be perfect. And Bali is a really good case in point. You can make a really fantastic life here despite some of the negatives involved in it. I hear a lot of people say the words, oh, this place is a dump and that's awful and it's not like it was in 1972. Some of that's true. But I mean, you can say that about everywhere. I mean, for example, Bondi Beach is not the same Bondi Beach as it was in 1965. That's okay. You know, if you like Bondi Beach, just make the best out of that situation. The same as me in Bali, I make the best out of this situation. Living in Bali is one of the best decisions I've made in my whole life, I think. Coming here to live, just such a good decision. I'm really glad I've done it and I'm really enjoying myself here. And I think most people can, given the right mindset and making sure that you undertake the right steps to make sure you don't go crazy, because that's possible. Thanks for coming along for the ride today and listening to my story about what it's like to live here in Bali. And thanks to all the members who have recently joined up. A lot of you have been joining up recently. I see new ones every now and then joining up, and I really appreciate your support, each and every one of you. Thanks for watching. Make sure you hit that subscribe button to keep up to date with all things Sanur and the rest of Indonesia. I'll catch you next time, and Sampai Jumpa.